So, welcome to the Improving Development Evaluation Podcast. I'm your host, David Wand, and in this episode, we're going to feature again the Global Community Engagement Resilience Fund, GCERF, GCERF. You can find out more about this organization at their website at GCERF, GCERF.org. So, in this one, we're going to talk about 1.1 million US dollars that the GCERF received from the Canadian taxpayer. Being a fund, I've featured them before on another episode for $5 million that they spent with the United States government. This is for the Canadian government. And what they do is, being a fund, is they then develop either one single grant project or several sub-projects or sub-grants out of this 1.1 million. Then they give it to a variety of organizations in developing countries and then hope that they deliver services based on that money to achieve a series of outcomes. Now, the good news is GCERF has done a lot of work to tell you in advance what, if you give them money, what they expect to achieve with that money when they deliver services in developing countries. So just to repeat, if you haven't seen the other episode, heard the other episode, there are 4 outcomes they expect to achieve if this money is effective. The first one is increased social cohesion. Number 2, increased ability to mobilize, organize, represent their own interests. That's what they call agency. Outcome number 3, increased knowledge, skills, as well as subsequent increases in income, access to livelihoods. Outcome number 4, increased confidence, critical thinking, life skills, self-worth, and resilience, what they refer to as sense of purpose. So that's on their website. In their strategy documents, they basically are very clear, which is good. You give us the money, we'll deliver services, and in the short term and in the long term, we're going to achieve any one of these 4 possible outcomes. So that's pretty clear. They also mention on their website very clearly that although they're a fund, they are still responsible for, and I quote, "At the grant level, each project is guided by a theory of change and a results framework with outcome and output indicators, requiring grantees to collect baseline data, report quarterly, and conduct final assessments." So it's pretty clear that even though they're a fund, they're still responsible for making sure the organizations they give the money to are achieving any one of those 4 outcomes. So you would expect in their reporting, they would have some outcome indicators on how they measure social cohesion, how they measure agency, how they measure increased knowledge, how they measure access to livelihoods, i.e. increases in income, and how they measure sense of purpose, increased confidence, critical thinking, life skills, self-worth. So it's pretty clear from that point. So given that, I'm going to give you a bit of history here because it gets a bit complicated. In September of 2024, over a year ago, I made the request to Global Affairs Canada through an access to information request for the performance measurement frameworks for the sub-grants that GCERF would produce, or projects, out of this 1.1 million US dollars that you as a Canadian taxpayer has given to GCERF, who then turn around and produce and create these grants in these developing countries to achieve any one of these 4 outcomes. October 2024, Global Affairs Canada replied, "No performance measurement frameworks exist for these sub-grants." So I submitted a complaint to the Information Commission of Canada, and I said, if there's no PMFs, give me something, give me anything that can show that they're actually measuring, that using outcome indicators, that any one of these 4 outcomes are actually being achieved. And they came back in February of 2025 and they said, well, you're right, they don't have any PMFs, they're not required, but there are, quote, quarterly reports linked to this 1.1 million US dollars. And I said, great. So then in July 2025, I made a request for these quarterly reports, attaching this email from the Information Commission of Canada confirming that these quarterly reports actually did exist. And I said, again, give me the outcome indicators for these funds out of these quarterly reports. And in August, Global Affairs Canada came back to me and said they needed a time extension on my request, even though these quarterly reports were produced way back in 2024 because the money was coming out of 2023. So even despite the fact the report's sitting on a shelf for over a year, they needed an extension. So I said, all right, waited for the extension. And then in October of 2025, I finally received a 5-page report dated from GCERF in June of 2024 from a board meeting where they talk about the so-called results or outcomes that I had requested. Now, before we get into the critique of that 5-page report and its insufficiencies, I would like to digress a bit here and talk to you about the fact that we have made a few changes to the podcast in the sense that I'm advocating for proper evaluation, but I'd like the listeners to send an email. So in the notes, I'll give you the email addresses and the names of the members of Parliament responsible for the NDP and Conservative shadow critics on international development, as well as the Secretary of State for the Liberal government for international development, so that you can recommend that they do proper evaluation, and until they do, they should suspend funding to these organizations. So in this case, GCERF. And also, as usual, I will be prepared to reply to any email. You can email me at evaluatecanadaaid@gmail.com if you want a copy of any of my critiques of any of the performance measurement frameworks from any of the previous episodes, and of course, the critique for this episode. And you can also make a donation. There's a donation button where you can buy me a coffee link because I need $5 to ask for more performance measurement frameworks. And despite the fact that they're produced years ago and money's already been spent, there's incredible delays in producing them for this podcast. Some journalists have suggested that's because it's a political stalling tactic. I don't know, but it's unfortunate that I have to wait for these PMFs or their equivalent before I can do an episode. And I have noticed in the last 14 days that there's people in Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, and Brazil that are listening to this podcast. So given that and the fact that Canadians and Americans in international development do go to the Global South, I will again promote the 3 products that you need to go to the Global South, usually when it's hot and humid. Of course, there's a rainy season at times, but you need a good sun hat, you need good sunglasses, and of course, you need some good sun-sensitive clothing. So starting with sun hats, you should check out ericjavits.com, ERICJAVITS.com, for some excellent hats to protect you from the sun, travel friendly and protective from the sun. You get a 20% discount off any product, and you can use the promo code WANDCOOL t-shirts. Just click on the link in the episode notes, my deals, and it'll go straight to that. I get a 20% commission of the total purchase you make. How protective from the sun? Well, ultraviolet protection factor with a 50 plus UPF rating, blocks 98% of UVA and UVB radiation, travel friendly, easy to pack, but retains its shape when you visit your international development project located in the Global South. That's ericjavits.com. The second product, of course, is sunglasses. You can find out more at Aquila, AKILA, ILA.LA, or you just click on the My Deals link in the episode notes. Prescription lenses, also available, all made from 50% recycled material. You get a 10% discount if you use my code WANDCOOL-T-shirts. And I get a 15% commission when you purchase any product using my promo code. So you have your hat and your sunglasses to protect you from the sun in the global south, but you need the right clothes to be comfortable in that hot and humid climate. How about some men's polos or tees at hypernaturalstyle.com? Hypernaturalstyle.com. You get 20% off any product when you use my promo code, WANDCOOL-T-shirts. And I get a 20% commission of the total purchase you make when you use my promo code, WANDCOOL-T-shirts. So what is so cool about these Hypernatural t-shirts? They have a patent-pending hypercool jade technology that when it's hot, it lowers your body temperature by 3 to 5 degrees. They are also breathable thanks to cotton, and they are sold in premium retailers like Nordstrom. Supina cotton, that is. And were voted the best men's polo shirts in 2024 in Men's Journal, Forbes, and Esquire. So there you have some sales, interesting, relevant products to your work in the global south. Now what we're going to do is get into details about the 5-page report that was provided to me in response to my request for outcome indicators, because that's critical, right? And the first problem with this 5-page report is that they make these claims, but there's no outcome indicators. Most of them are output indicators, talking about what they've actually delivered in terms of services, but they don't talk about the next step, which is once you deliver the services, what expected outcomes of the 4 that we mentioned previously did they achieve? So, for example, on page 1 of this document, they say GCERF funded projects continue, for example, to educate and create livelihood opportunities, build critical thinking skills, rehabilitate and reintegrate former combatants and their families, and often claim with, quote, remarkable efficiency and cost effectiveness. The problem is there's no measures of effectiveness, which is a Development Assistance Committee criteria. There's no outcome indicators. So I'm going to read for the record verbatim from the results that they do provide in my request for outcome indicators. Quote, a selection of results to date which illustrate the diversity of these efforts include 358 local partners funded in 22 countries, 27 new grants signed and 59 grants in total, with 44 under active implementation. In 2023, nearly 20 million indirect beneficiaries reached in addition to 3.8 million reached directly. You notice a heavy emphasis on reach, but not what happens after they reach them with these services. So let's get to the more specific ones. More than 35,000 religious leaders engaged in conflict resolution, but did it resolve the conflict? No measurement. Peace advocacy? We don't know if they have ability to advocate. Critical thinking? No measures of critical thinking. Leadership skills? No measures of leadership skills. More than 57,000 individuals reached with livelihood and employability related interventions. Again, no measures in the report of indicators, outcome indicators to measure income or vocational skill acquisition. And here's the big one. More than 400,000 participants reached with cultural and sports activities to, quote, build social cohesion and prevent violent extremism. There's no measures of social cohesion in the report, nothing. And as I mentioned on my previous episode with GCERF for the 5 million in the United States, I'll say it again here, for $40 you can get the University of California Irvine NET, UCNet, social networking software that will measure levels of social cohesion before, during, and after a sports activity. For example, GCERF has held a soccer football game between religious madrasa students and public non-religious students to see if that would build social cohesion. But there's no measure of that before, during, and after. And you could do it very easily, measuring something called reciprocity as a measure of social cohesion. That's an example. And Marco Rubio on a YouTube video has shown testifying that he's proud of taking away a $14 million project in Mali that was building social cohesion. And he said, quote, whatever the hell that is. Well, here's an example where you could show him this is how you measure and build social cohesion. And that may, maybe not, convince him, oh, okay, I see what you mean now. Let's go ahead and continue the funding. But if you don't do that, obviously people will use that, as this example shows, where they have scrapped the funding. There could be other reasons, of course, for why the funding was suspended, but that's a major one. So this is the problem with this response to my request for outcome indicators. There's none in this report. To be fair to GCERF, the government of Canada, when they provided this funding to GCERF, may not have required it. We still don't know. So I've issued a complaint to the Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada to go to the next level and say, I did receive a response, but once again, I didn't get any outcome indicators. So I would like to know if they do exist, and if they do exist, can we see them? But currently, here was an opportunity for GCERF to provide some outcome indicators, and they did not. So I would go ahead and recommend that funding be suspended for GCERF until they start properly evaluating their projects. They can't just say because we're a fund, we're not responsible. But because, as I have said earlier, it's clear on their website that they are responsible for grantees in developing outcome indicators and measuring them to make sure that any one of those four indicators, social cohesion, agency, or increased knowledge, or increases in income, or sense of purpose, are being achieved. So that is not the case right now. So when it comes to rehabilitation and reintegration of former combatants, there is a plethora of outcome indicators you can use in the field of psychology to measure levels of reintegration and levels of rehabilitation. And there's no mention of that in this report. They have an opportunity to hire a consultant, a psychologist, to develop some of these measuring instruments, or not even develop them, but get them from the literature. The other one that's a big stretch that I've mentioned before is this claim that if they achieve these four outcomes, those in turn will contribute to a reduction or a prevention of violent extremism. And just to quote again from the report, more than 400,000 participants reached with cultural and sports activities to build social cohesion and prevent violent extremism. There's no evidence in the report of any outcome indicator showing that social cohesion has actually been increased, and there's absolutely no evidence provided in this report that shows that that in turn, or for that matter, any of the outcomes that they expect to achieve, have contributed to a prevention of violent extremism. Now, it is possible to show that link. One way to do that is to develop a multiple regression statistical model, which you could do. And again, you could hire a statistician to do it and say, here are some outcome indicators for the four expected outcomes you have. Here's how they would look in a multiple regression equation. And then on the dependent variable side, we could have a measure of whether or not violent extremism has been reduced or prevented, as this report is claiming with absolutely no empirical evidence at all. So that's why we can't fund GCERF until they start producing outcome indicators with the related data that shows these expected outcomes have been achieved. And I would give them a break and I would say, look, that's good enough. If you can show that you've achieved any of these four outcomes, increase social cohesion, especially outcome number 3, which is very easy to do. I did it in Kano, Nigeria with Adam Smith International. They were training adolescent female women who are vulnerable to violent extremism and human trafficking, becoming suicide bombers. So they were training them in vocational skills. You can measure those skills to see if they actually become, through a certification test, a certified seamstress. And then from that, you can track to see if they actually made income from that new acquired skill. That would be sufficient. To make the link from there to preventing violent extremism statistically would be a little bit more complicated. But at least they could try to show through the social cohesion example I gave of an outcome indicator and a measuring instrument called UCNet software, and of course, vocational skills, and followed by subsequent increases in income. Those would be pretty easy to show that the organizations that GCERF has funded with your $1.1 million has actually been, quote, effective. But right now, there's no evidence that any of this money has been effective, certainly not cost effective, as this 5-page report claims. So we'll leave it at that, and I'll keep you up to date on whether the investigation from the Independent Office of the Information Commissioner of Canada goes back to Global Affairs Canada and goes back to GCERF and says, where are these outcome indicators? Because we still don't see them. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.